Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Escow Show. It is truly a pleasure to be with you. Very excited and humbled, actually, to be with you. Not only am I presenting to you what I think is perhaps the most important information that I've discovered in 5 years of hosting a podcast around the theme of searching for my political identity, but it's also an opportunity to touch base with you amid such incredible current events. Incredible, maybe is the right word. Such astounding current events. Of course, so I'm going to say a word or two about Iran from my perspective, just to acknowledge that it's happening, and then I'm going to present to you. So if you are familiar, or rather, if you've been following my podcast in the last several solo episodes, punctuated with guests appearances, but I've been kind of building this narrative where I've been listening to this lecture series through the Jordan Peterson Academy, which I bought a subscription for. This lecture series is called The Big Ideas of Psychology 101, taught by apparently a world-renowned professor, Roy Baumeister is his name. I really do like him. Um, it's an 8 lecture series. And in the first few, as I noted in some episodes, I found it really interesting that Dr. Baumeister really highlights the importance of culture as a tool for survival for the human race, and really just as a mechanism solving the, what does he call it, the survival and reproduction uh, problem that all living beings have. And so the idea was that, well, let me take a sip of tea. Geez, can I take a break? Can I have a breather? Because I didn't even get to Iran yet. Hold on. I'm going too hard. How are you? Nice to be with you. But to put a cap on my little preview summary here is, well, culture, as Dr. Baumeister said in several of those previous lectures, is basically how humans have evolved to um, interact with one each other by sharing resources, basically by sharing information. We're able, that's what separates humans from other animals, even other social animals. Political behavior, or rather um, cultural behavior. Culture is like uh, social interactions on steroids, and it's a uniquely human thing, is the argument of the lecture course. Culture is really important. So I took that and go, oh, look at me getting involved in the culture wars, taking this stance against the woke stuff, against the critical race theory, feeling more like a Republican these days. That leading me into the arms of Trump ultimately, when Kennedy, who I supported in 2024, endorsed him. And after the Butler assassination attempt, I just went Trump, and I've been pretty comfortable here ever since, acknowledging that Trump is unique and he's different and he does take drastic actions. And so, not running from that, just saying, okay, this is the political environment right now, but trying to understand what it all means, what the labels mean, the right, the left. And so, um, was really struck, not to repeat myself, but the importance of culture from the perspective of the psychologist. Okay, so that was cool. And so little did I know that the seventh lecture series, sorry, the seventh lecture in this course, The Big Ideas of Psychology 101, the seventh one would be something called human political behavior, but it's all about human political behavior. And I finally finished it, and I'm going to share my notes on that with you today. And so I've been building up towards talking about this episode. I have not finished. I don't know what the eighth episode is on. I'm actually curious what that'll be. I'll report to you. I'll let you know. But in terms of me searching for political identity, even as a Trump supporter, this could not have felt more relevant. So it went from, oh, maybe I was onto something with my feelings about the culture war. And this is kind of cool that I took this class, to, oh, wow. Oh, wow. This guy's going to tell me his theory of politics and human behavior. This is going to be good. So this is finally that episode. So looking forward to sharing that with you. But let me say a few words about Iran after another sip of tea. This episode is brought to you by Sip a Tea. First of all, I have a just to use a little humor to ease us into it. I have a new saying. We're getting rid of TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. It's now WEAF, and that may be too similar to WEF, World Economic Forum, for my listeners. So maybe we're scrapping that. WEAF. What does it stand for? Geez, I should have wrote that in the notes. It stands for World Event Altering Friday, right? Every Friday seems to be something. You can't sleep well on a Friday. It's a very newsy. What is Trump going to do next Friday? But no, this past Friday, Sunday already, right? But yeah, the world changed. The world changed, to say the least. I'm not really going to comment much on it because I'm not an expert. I'd love to have an expert on in the near future to talk about it, but I have a person in my life, without getting more specific than that, who is an expert. This is an Iranian. I'll say this: it's an Iranian American that I know, and I've talked about several times in years past about the situation in Iran, the government in Iran. This person, did I already use an identifying pronoun? Sip of tea. This person grew up in Iran, went to school in Iran, loves Iran, great person. And we've talked in the past about the government in Iran and how this person is not a fan of that government and oppressive and so forth. And so I've been kind of indoctrinated through her to think, okay, Trump once again has the correct instincts towards situation X, in this case, the Iranian regime government. And so, and being a Jew, I have certain dispositions anyway. So this person is not a Trump supporter, certainly not a Trump voter, also not someone who has TDS. This is a rare person who doesn't have TDS, though. And so I texted them. I waited a day or two because but I texted them and I said, wow, thinking of you. And they wrote back. This was yesterday evening. It's happening. Khamenei was the head on the snake. Should have said of the snake, right? The body, which is the Revolutionary Guards, has 3 heads. One of them was killed, 2 left to go. The snake is still alive. So that was the report. That's as much as I can get for reporting to you, but super heavy, super intense. Now there's been some American casualties. We know so we know this is world changing truly. And there is an instinct, I won't deny it. In fact, I'm proud of it. Right or wrong, when the American military is engaged, call it jingoism, call it whatever you want. The instinct is to just band together, is to solidify and be proud of our men and women who train night and day to execute orders, to follow orders when given. And so these are historic times. We've acknowledged that over the months and years on this podcast. And, we put Trump in office. We helped Trump put in office, because we thought, I'm kind of speaking for myself here, because I thought I voted for him and have supported that because I thought he was better suited than the alternative. And now consequential things are happening and I'm not running from it. And I'm praying for everyone involved, first and foremost, the American troops and Israeli troops. Why not? And the people of Iran, of course. Praying for everyone. Praying for everyone. Crazy stuff. Wild. All right. So let's get to the topic at hand. Why do I call this the most important podcast I've done in 5 years of podcasting? Well, I don't want to pretend like I'm too overexcited. I don't know. I am excited about this. I'm a little flat right now, so I'm not going to pretend to oversell it. But let me tell you what I found to be very interesting about this course. Okay. So first of all, you have Professor Baumeister, who's great. He makes an initial statement that he is first. Okay, first of all, let me say I'm about to go through a bunch of notes that I took during his lecture. Everything that I wrote down comes from him. So any thought, if I don't say while I'm saying it, hey, this is something that he said, just trust me, this is something that he said. So I'm about to give you basically Baumeister's words. Okay, of course I'm going to say it in my way, but everything that I'm about to tell you is credited to Dr. Baumeister's work. I'm going to walk you through his lecture. Okay, on human political behavior. He first says that he aspires to be neutral with respect to politics because he's after the truth in his profession as a psychologist, a social scientist, whatever you would call himself. But that's what he's after. And I said, wow, this is good for me because here we go, making it about me. My podcast is not about identifying purely as a right winger. Now that it's about understanding who am I that I voted for Trump. Wow, what does that say about me? What does that mean? So it's still on. The game is still on. It's not about saying I'm a right winger now. Just because I say I'm MAGA, I like MAGA, doesn't mean mystery solved, identity, you know, solidified. It's still very much a search for me. And so I appreciated that he said that, and that's how I want to approach things. I want to look at things holistically, and I want the truth as well. So maybe I should be a social scientist or a psychologist. Maybe I need a psychologist. Um, then he goes on to say that politics and political behavior is very complicated, and he starts by talking about the concept of prejudice. Okay, which is an interesting way to start, right? And he talks about this theory called the contact hypothesis, which I think is the idea that if you put, I think it has something to do with racial, like a racial thing. If you put different groups of people together for long enough periods of time, they will eventually get along and understand each other. And I guess his initial point about that is that it actually really hasn't held up, that stereotypes are fairly accurate, his words. So, okay, we're opening the lecture with a comment about prejudice is a real thing, obviously. I guess we're not shying away from that. We're studying human beings after all. And the idea that you just put people together and kind of maybe in a melting pot, I'm inferring here, together, because he's talked about multiculturalism in the past. So this is a relevant theme. Everyone will get along? No, not the case. Stereotypes are fairly accurate. Then he goes on to say, so I'm like, okay, that's how we're starting. The exception, he says, is political stereotype. The exception to the idea that stereotypes are generally accurate, which is okay. Like, should I be offended now as a Jew or Asian people or Black people? Like, okay, but he says the exception to stereotypes being accurate is politics. There is a high degree of distortion and demonization on both sides about the other side. So that's the opening point. Sip of tea. For whatever reason, he wants us to know that prejudice is a relevant concept. Stereotypes tend to be accurate, but not in politics. Okay, interesting. Then he makes a comment about how poor people tend to vote Republican. You know, that you've heard this before. You'd think that they vote Democrat. And I'm like, oh, here's a typical liberal professor. Here we go. Apparently they misunderstand why do people vote against their interests? You know, you hear people say that. I was like, oh, is this going to be just like a kind of one of those kind of lefty lectures? But hang with me. Then he says, there's also an enormous amount of bias on the left amongst people with advanced degrees. And he was saying, people like me, he's saying, almost all Democrats. So biased people, smart people have a very strong left-leaning bias, and he found that disturbing. So he's telling us he started reading smart right-wingers. So you get a sense of where he started initially, right? Maybe on the left, as your typical case. But he started in his career, he started reading smart right-wingers, not to be in an echo chamber. I'm like, okay, this is the lecture I want to be listening to, right? This is perfect. As he said, if you're surrounded by people who share the same views, you're not going to get the truth. One-sidedness is not good for education. Okay, professor, we're in agreement. Let's rock and roll. Do I have a tissue? No. Okay, no problem. So after making this initial comment about prejudice and um, not being one-sided, he makes a couple points. Well, this is okay. I did reorganize it slightly. So the next section I've got from his lecture is the origins of the political divide and why it's getting worse. This was very interesting. It was all very interesting. He told me, I didn't know this. Of all my, I should have known this. I couldn't believe this. But the origins of the term left and right goes back to 18th century France. The Estates General. God, I should have practiced that. But King Louis, I guess there was a tremendous economic crisis, I suppose, during or preceding the French Revolution. I should know my history better. Shame on me. Obviously, we know that the French and then the American Revolution are, paramount uh, events in political history, but the details beyond that, I can't say that I'm an expert. But um, he explained that in I think it was the late 18th century, King of France convened this legislative body, which so this is the beginning of legislative bodies, I guess, becoming into effect. Um, to complement the monarchy, I guess, because he needed help, right, figuring out this financial crisis. And so he put people together, and the people who sat on the left of the table were the businessmen, the forward-thinking. Interesting that it's businessmen, but the movers and shakers, the people who wanted to disrupt the status quo at the time, and the people on the right were the people most aligned with the monarchy and most aligned with religion. Interesting. And so, literally, that's where the terms left and right comes from. Fascinating. He also went on to describe liberal progressive socialism. So he's walking capitalism, fascism. So an interesting insight into the term fascism, how he just makes the point, and this is where I started to really go, okay, my ears are perking up, professor. Taking all the tension out of the labels and saying, yeah, really the left does throw around this term fascist, and they claim to be anti-fascist when, if you really look at it, the most governments that have actually been fascist in history are left-leaning. So it's a little strange. So I'm on his wavelength going through the labels like, this is perfect. Here we go, on our way. In addition to explaining the origins of the terms left and right, he went even way further back in history and gave me an explanation and understanding of how human behavior and civilization and, I guess, economic activity happened before civilization in the hunter gathering time. So you had hunter gatherers, um, and so okay, so I'm misreading my note here. Sorry, I got myself a little screwed up, but I'm very much where I want to be. Um, you had hunter gatherers, and the idea here was that my note was something wrong with that note, but I know what I want to say, so it's all good. He went back in time to hunter gatherers, and he made the point that back in the day, everyone did everything. It was before the Adam Smith division of labor, focus on one task, compartmentalize, because that increases productivity and that grows the economy and that advances society. Okay, interesting. But one consequence, an enormous consequence of that, and it makes total sense, is that as you increase that um, compartmentalization, um, you you begin to lose touch with the other people that are doing. Okay, so I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back it up. The point is that evolution got humanity to the point during the hunter and gathering stage where we were able to share resources more efficiently than other animals. Evolution made us better at getting resources and sharing them. That was how we got to the hunter gathering stage and so forth. And because people back then did both jobs, the hunting and the gathering and the sharing, maybe gathering is considering sharing as well, people understood both sides of the coin of how society operates better. And nowadays, we've got this psychological overhang. It was a beautiful term. He must have said that. I surely that didn't come from me. This psychological overhang of the difference between how we live today versus the old hunting and gathering ways. Back then, people did both jobs again, so they understood both sides better, the hunting and the gathering. Nowadays, people do different things. Different people do different things. They're so specialized, and that has led to increased productivity and increased societal advancement. But that has one consequence of that has also been the polarization, because we don't understand each other. The left and the right are doing different things in society, as we're going to get to understand as we go through this, and they understand each other less and less. And then remember, this, for some reason, there's a high degree of distortion in political stereotypes, whereas most stereotypes are accurate. So this is really hard. Now we start to see, why don't we get along? Why are we living in two different worlds? Starting to click. All right, on we go. We've moved on to the water. Tea's done. So let's get to the meat and potatoes. What is Professor's theory of a successful political arrangement? Because that's what we're after, right? The perfect identity, the perfect government, the perfect society. What is it? Here's what he says. Bauermeister says the indicator of a successful country is that it regularly alternates power between center left and center right. He says long term, one party rule is a disaster, a few exceptions. He points to Singapore. China, question mark? I mean, it's all relative, right? But China did adapt their economy from pure socialism to more capitalistic. He notes, and that's true. He asks, is the CCP today a Marxist organization? Well, yes, but in the same way that the mafia is a Catholic organization. Okay, interesting food for thought. He says maybe both sides. I shouldn't say he says. This is all him. Maybe both sides, the left and the right, and the alternation itself between power, who has power, produces benefits. So among the most important things culture does is produce more resources and share them to some degree, right? So this is what tripped me up before. I had a note and I wasn't prepared to talk about it, but that said, when I was talking about the hunting, gathering, and civilizations, if an ape, and the difference between humans and animals and what culture has done, if an ape fell out of a tree and breaks its leg, see it, it's over. But humans, because of culture and caring and concern, because of culture, if a human falls out of the tree and breaks his leg, we're going to take care of it. Because of culture, the father's going to provide for the 2-year-old baby. The baby's not going to be judged on its output. The baby's not going to have to fend for itself. The baby will be provided for because of culture. Now, look, I mean, if I was in the lecture class, I would have written, Professor, I mean, babies eat. I mean, babies and other species eat, so I don't know. But that's what he was saying. But the alteration produces benefits, and culture, because it serves this vital function that culture serves, which is producing more resources and sharing them. So if the secret sauce of humanity is culture, and if culture is producing more resources and sharing them better, then of course it makes perfect sense that the perfect theory of government, the perfect political identity to have, is let's have a power sharing between center left and center right, so we keep this system pumping out resources and sharing and okay, it kind of makes sense. And it's like, have your cake and eat it too. It's kind of like both. It's kind of like not an answer, but it's kind of like an answer at the same time. So I'm kind of digging this. Let's move on. The left and the right take different approaches to those topics being producing more resources and sharing. The right focuses on accumulation, the left focuses on redistribution. The ultimate achievement of the left was the welfare state. It redistributes money for people in need, and affirmative action redistributes opportunity. Successful countries alternate power, and both jobs get done. Both jobs, again, being production of resources and sharing of resources. One party country rules don't get it done, don't get the job done. See, we're defining politics as the job. We're defining the goal as production and sharing. It's like, again, a cheat code. Mm. So the ideal way to share, if the goal was purely to share, would be everyone gets an equal share, and that's communism. The ideal way to produce would be total free market, laissez-faire. And so free markets create incentives, and rewarding merit rewards producers and contributors, and that creates inequality. So that's one fundamental conflict between the left and the right, is meritocracy and equality. The left doesn't understand too often, it seems, how capitalism creates a productive and growing society. It being the left, only sees the negatives of the free market, of capitalism. Privilege is also an unsolvable riddle, Bauermeister says. And it actually invites thinking about concept of ownership, he says. So he said he wrote an essay, I think he said he wrote an essay um, on the concept of ownership, and it makes you think of the concept of self and John Locke and what the original origins of the term liberal, right? To own yourself, to own your labor, say this is mine, not yours, government. I mean, that's the original OG liberal. So I mean, but we're not getting into labels. But he says privilege is an unsolvable riddle, because if you have self, if you own yourself, then you do own things, and why should you not be able to pass them on to your to your children or whoever you want? So you have this idea of inheritance inequality, and he talks about his experience as being kind of a left-leaning socialist professor in his early career, more to a capitalist, transitioning after having a baby. He said he had a bit of a crisis of conscience. Truly, he punctuated that. He said he really did. It bothered him. But when he had a baby, he started feeling like, hey, I need to accumulate resources and pass them on to this child, to this thing. So the unfairness of passing wealth along becomes increasingly unfair. That is a comment that he shared. I think some social scientists made that observation. The unfairness of passing wealth along becomes increasingly unfair. Okay, as the generations go along is the point he was making there, was the observation. And we've heard, as generations go on, the family gets less and less capable with the money, is sometimes, speaking of stereotypes, sometimes said of families with large wealth. But so putting that comment to the side for a second, it was just kind of an aside. After he had a baby, he started feeling, it bothered him, but nonetheless, he started really feeling like he needs to accumulate and provide. And he understands why parents work hard. And that is why parents work hard, he said. And this is a world-renowned psychologist telling me parents, and it's not rocket science, but yeah, parents are really hardwired to provide. And so privilege means that you had parents that gave you a better start in life. And that's just going to happen in a free society. These are his words verbatim. Many of these are, by the way. The left is more uncomfortable with that. The right shrugs it off and says it's part of what motivates people and advances society. So when you hear Matt Walsh and the culture warriors, there is something to this conversation about, is the left attacking the family as an institution, and the family is the building block of society, of Western civilization. The left would have you rely on the government. The right would have you rely on family. It's an extremely interesting distinction. And when you really think about it, no one is getting held out to dry in either scenario. Now you have the one-offs who have no family. You do have people who have no family, and so that's a separate conversation. But generally speaking, for the structure of society, to be more dependent on the government versus more dependent on your family, just it's interesting to consider that we're talking about taking care of people in both situations, just different ways of doing it. And kind of perfectly, that leads into my next note here, which is there is a lot more agreement than people realize. And this is again from his lecture directly. There is a lot more agreement than people realize um, on the principles, on the values rather, that help the very needy, but don't help the freeloaders. So distinguishing between the very needy and the freeloaders, very important, perhaps much more important to people on the right, but important to both. Everyone agrees, help the very needy, don't help the freeloaders. The devil's in the details. But there's a lot of common ground on the values. As you know, the right emphasizes personal responsibility. Most of the self-help coaches that you follow, even if they're not outwardly explicitly political, they probably don't have TDS, even if they're not Republicans or Trump supporters, right? There is something to the idea that the right emphasizes personal responsibility more, and the left emphasizes external causes more. They're victims of society. They just do. They focus on that's just what each side focuses on, right? Both sides are correct about much. So, okay, that's fair. I agree. Now, this is actually me. Yeah, both sides are right about much. Sure, I agree with that. But you can't ride the fence forever. You do at a certain point have to put your shovel in the ground and say, okay, this is where we are now, and let's analyze here and now. But fair enough. Fair enough. Both sides are right about much. Okay, I can roll with that. I actually bolded this. Attitudes towards inequality is a big differentiator, right? How they feel about the poor. One side wants to solve inequality, the other side wants it to remain. Not that anyone's cheering for poverty, but excuse me, all that water. One side wants to really focus on solving inequality. The other side is just like okay with it because they understand that that's how society works. You have to have inequality because inequality is a result of a free market system. A free market system is how you lead to a thriving and growing society. So if you want to thrive and grow, you got to have some inequality. And you choose. The degree to which the poor people are responsible for being poor is highly variable. Therefore, people are poor for different reasons, lots of different reasons. Therefore, it's hard to come up with a simple moral formula for how to deal with poverty. That makes sense to me. I like that. Take care of the poor people that really need it. Take care of the really needy. But it's okay to not want to incentivize bad lifestyles. It's okay to take a hard look at the welfare state, in my opinion. What happens with one party rule? Well, there's not many cases of one party rule right wing governments, but the idea is that it would be something like the actual ancient empires where resources are produced, farmers toil, and the elites hog them. All right. The king, the farmers and the people working the land pay for the administrative state, and that's how the king lives, and they're a parasite off the people. There are a lot more cases in history and contemporary society of one party left wing rule. Venezuela was one of them. Um, Professor points out that Venezuela was rich, but the left took it over, focused on redistributing. Everyone was happy at the beginning, but no one focused on creating resources over the long term. And then the whole economy reversed and people started migrating out. And there were many other such cases. Soviet Union, similar problems with left wing rule. The left is skeptical of the free market because it increases inequality, like I said, but it also increases resources. Both points are valid. Okay. What we end up with, what we end up getting with a long-term leftist government is more equality. Okay, pause, ... But it's the equality of being poor. Shit. Wow. Sit on that. Again, these are kind of comic book statements. I'm not saying I don't agree with them. I probably wouldn't be. I'm not saying I don't agree with them. I'm just saying you could have 3-hour conversations about any one of these statements and go into vast data but just giving you a flavor of the lecture. He said a philosopher said, he didn't quote the philosopher, so I don't know who it was, said, judge a country based on how the bottom 10% lives. Think about that. Maybe there's a lot of inequality in a country, let's say America, but the bottom 10% are living better than royalty in previous eras. So, okay, well, hold on, little gymnastics there, but uh, yeah, you hear that. Wait a minute. Yes, there's vast inequality, but is that the prime? Here's the point. Is that the most important metric to focus on? Or is the most important metric to focus on how the bottom 10% are living? Whoa, that does feel more on point, doesn't it? That that does feel more on point. Wait a minute. The existence of vast wealth inequality, and I'm not saying I am advocating for wealth inequality. I'm just saying, from a purely logical perspective, the existence of vast wealth inequality doesn't necessarily imply that the people at the bottom of that structure are living terribly. Now, are they? No. Are they? That's really the question. So I think that's really interesting. So let's focus on the bottom 10%, because that way you're definitely focusing on people in the most need. And so are we? That's the profound question that I do need to research more, frankly. But you hear that a lot from the right. The bottom 10% in America are, yeah, okay, they're poor compared to a lot of people in America. Okay, perhaps. But compared to look around the world, look throughout history, they get it pretty damn good. Interesting. Now, there's an interesting comment here, or not comment, but he talks about, he goes on to talk about the concept of time and morality, a couple topics here, taxes. Okay, so let's talk about time, morality, and taxes. Because he just mentioned these are different, for some reason he broke these out into separate kind of top talking points of how the left and the right look at things differently. So, and it really is true. So they're useful. Time. The left says the present is bad. It's got inequality. It's got injustice. The past is where the crimes occurred that produced the injustice of the present, and the future has got to be very different, right? Sounds like your typical progressive. Mamdani. Mamdani has entered the room. Sorry for all the water, guys. I'm not feeling that well. The right sees the present as pretty good. And he goes on to say actually that conservatives are generally a bit happier, keyword, happier than those on the left. It's not a huge gap, but it is a detectable gap, a bit happier than those on the left. Okay, interesting. All right, so people who have said that, you're validated a bit there, but it's not an enormous swing, or gap rather. The right sees the distant past as bad, and therefore they view the systems we have now, the present, as huge improvements, and they're comfortable with that. It's not that they don't want any change, they just want incremental, specific improvements. Hear that about conservatives, right? Edward Burke, right? The Burkean, what do they call it? Burkeanism. They see the future as a slightly improved version of what we have now. Yeah, I would say that accurately explains how the left and the right, generally speaking, view time. Sure. Okay, morality, fairness. So I don't have much to say here. What do my notes say? Fairness, proportionality, equity. Well, look, I guess the point here is the other note is families share things equally. Strangers do not. So again, remember the baby doesn't have to earn its keep, but the employee at a corporation does. It's a matter of how you're sharing the resources, and you get into the concept of rights and duties. Rights and duties. What is each citizen entitled to? What do you have a right to? Because a right really is an entitlement, right? Isn't it the same thing? I'm entitled to this protection against the government from God. That's what a right is. The left would say, we want to add some more there. We want to, the Bernies, right? They want to do the economic Bill of Rights and say, literally, this is what we're talking about. We, as as a citizen, they might not use God, but maybe they would to. That would be an amazing question to a progressive. Would you use God as the justification to create an economic Bill of Rights? And of course, it is the only logical explanation of the Bill of Rights, whether or not you believe in God or not. Everyone knows the Bill of Rights is based on God given rights. Would you use that logic to get your economic Bill of Rights through? Okay, but they want to add, say, God protects you from poverty, and the government, therefore, the government has to give you X amount of dollars. And we may be going there. Okay, but make the point. But that's where the left is coming from, where the right is coming from. No, it's families that do that. It's families that do that. Only worry about the fringe cases, encourage families. Doesn't this sound like the culture war? And, cutting to the chase here, yeah, there's common ground. And we should work on areas where we can. Well, forget cutting to the chase. Let's go on with our story. We'll get to the chase. I blanked out. Too much pressure. Okay, taxes and regulations. Well, the only point here is that the left wants more taxes for redistribution and more regulations because more protection. More regulations equals more protection from the big bad evildoers of the world, the capitalists. Whereas the Republicans, the right, less of both. Tax us less, let us build more wealth, and regulate us less, let us build more wealth. Yeah, back to this point of why the misunderstanding between the left and the right increases, why we're so polarized. Social media. I mean, obviously, we haven't talked about that yet. But the algorithms, obviously, all of that. Building upon this basic psychological problem. Maybe we can call it the overhang that hunter gatherers didn't have wealth to preserve, and we were wired to live that way. And now we have all these specialized roles, and we don't understand each other nearly as well as we used to. Now, recall, once you had farming, you can store wealth, and that set off the chain of events that led to compartmentalization of roles, productivity. Now, not everyone works together in modern society, and then we have all this resentment between the producers and the free riders because they don't understand each other. So more inequality as time goes on because there's more wealth. So you catch that? We keep making more wealth. Therefore, we keep making more inequality. But is the inequality necessarily itself bad? Or should we focus on the bottom 10%? Apparently, there is a psychologist, I believe he's a psychologist, yeah, named Jonathan Haidt, Haidt, that said both conservatives and liberals are right about the things they care about. Okay, fair enough. So it's this idea, okay, let me say my piece here now, and it won't be very much, but well, actually, now that I recall, I actually do have a bullet point at the end. So we're building towards it. We're right there. We're on the cusp of getting there. Wait for the punchline. I told you I was flat today. Apologize. So yes, the left and the right are both right about the things they care about. Okay, fine. And the professor asks, can we get to a place where politicians can agree to disagree? Because they're both right about the things they care about, and they both care about different things. So that's a problem in terms of how they get along. They're never going to agree. So can they agree to disagree? That, and that's kind of like simple, but it's kind of profound. We all want we harken back to those times of Tip O'Neill. I mean, isn't that a name we hear? Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, and they all got along, and they had drinks together, and they had a smoke, and they got deals done, and so there's something to that. Maybe there's something to that. Some people refer to that as the deep state and the uniparty, but is there a good side of that? Probably. So after this lecture, a student asked, there's one student question, and it was the perfect question. Professor, you've been neutral And this is good for truth seeking, but what's the perfect middle, right? What in other words, what's the answer though? Okay, what's the right political identity? What's the right government? Is it monarchy? Is it benevolent monarchy? Is it, what is it? We want to know. And he basically professed there's no answer. It's refer back to the power sharing concept between center left and center right. So here are my closing thoughts and what it means for me. I won't pretend to be overly educated in anything, including political history, but I recall, I think it was in eighth grade, coming across, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, the, you know, basic, their basic ideas and their names and how they were important figures in political history. And I'm thinking about the Leviathan, and I just was talking to Grok about it earlier today, making sure I had my basic understanding right. It's like, yes, this idea that Hobbes' observation of society was that, you know, we had before civilization the state of nature, where what was right, morality, was determined by anything you needed for self-preservation. So, law of the jungle. And we were in this state of nature, and that's where the famous quote, life was short, brutish, and whatever, not pretty. The life of man, of humanity, it was brutal. It was brutal. And then so we decided to go into the social contract where we give up a lot of our natural rights and exchange that for, this idea that we're all going to work together into a society for mutual benefit. It's going to be a net positive for each of us by surrendering certain of what were previously considered natural rights. And so, what is government? Well, government is this. So, this is what he calls the Leviathan, this super, named after this big behemoth, this hidden beast under the sea. The Leviathan is the person. If the society, if the country, the people, all together was represented as one person, that's the Leviathan. That's what the government is. It's the state. That's what the state is. The state is basically everyone combined working to increase mutual benefit, right? And so we enter into the contract for that reason. And so what is government? Government is the representation of all people. And so you want that to, whatever it is, you want it to be good. You want it to work. And so what is it? What is its goal? To increase benefits. And, if you don't have the same basic cultural understanding, this is just kind of a random sidebar. If you don't believe in self-ownership and freedom to retain the fruits of your labor, if that's not where you're coming from, then you might have a different conception of what increased aid looks like or increased benefits look like. But nonetheless, government at its core is the society at whole. And so that's another thing. If you have multiculturalism, okay, well, so then so it's easy when it's um, homogenous culturally, because then you know what that Superman, if you will, that big picture, that Leviathan state representative is. You know what the people believe in. But when you have multiculturalism, that's a problem that you have to ensure doesn't. Not that I agree with the woke right, but what I do agree with is you do have to keep your eye on that. You do have to have a base culture. You can't let go of the anger entirely. So anyway, the state is the people all combined. Multiculturalism does have to confront the question of identity and who are we? So it's all very relevant. But at the end of the day, you just want someone competent. We're talking about producing resources and sharing them and advancing society. I want people to thrive. You want people to thrive. You want your family to thrive. You may care about random people on the street more than I do or less than I do. That may be the big difference between left and the right. But at the end of the day, this strengthens my assessment that there are good people on both sides, and both people want the same thing. They just have different views of how to get there. This actually explains the psychology behind it. And it's, I guess, not really a revelation, but it's interesting. It was pretty interesting, right? So Trump, Trump is, to me, and maybe you disagree, but it, competent. He represents someone who's bold and competent, and there are consequential things happening as we speak. I'm praying for all of us, and I guess this is one of those times. It's interesting in the age of Trump, maybe the first of any, and it's really interesting in the age of Trump. It's not like a 9/11, thank God, thank God, and prayers that it doesn't get there, but the hair stands up on your neck a little bit and you go, okay, we're at war now. We're at war now. So it kind of is like a 9/11. So we're with that unifying thing is kind of kicking in, at least for me. And so I think it is for everybody, but we're in the age of Trump. We're in the age of social media. We're in the age of algorithms. It's There's a million reasons under the sun to be polarized. And your basic human psychology is the foundation, is the first one. So I guess I don't. And so last thing I want to say is I'm totally guilty of falling into the trap of. It's not that I so much. I will say I'm guilty a little bit of stereotyping people unfairly on the left. More so, I would say what I'm guilty of is playing into that narrative for clicks, for likes, for views, for the dopamine hit online. I won't deny that you start to believe it a little bit, right? And that I do believe a little bit that Trump derangement syndrome is real. So I do believe that. I'm not running from that, but I acknowledge that I am totally a human being who gets riled up and does not always comport himself perfectly appropriately and roots for one team over the other and is tribalistic. And but at the end of the day, I just want people to do well. I want our country to do well, and I think that's my assessment of Trump, and that's why I got comfortable supporting him. And my whole thing about being a little contentious is like, I go, well, why don't you notice that about Trump? Why can't you just accept, the guy has flaws, and they're, whatever. I don't want to even say they're significant because we all have significant flaws. Okay, the guy has flaws, whatever. But can't you recognize that he loves the country? So that's my analysis of Trump. I didn't go into it too much, but he. Well, I guess I could say one more thing about CRT. I just got this feeling as I studied critical race theory that it was anti-American and that it was creating too many holes in that melting pot. If the melting pot is now a boat, and now the water is flooding, the boat is sinking, or rather the juice, the American that makes America the jambalaya, was leaking out. Too many holes. Not to say that I got a problem with multiculturalism. I don't. I wouldn't be accepted into America without multiculturalism being accepted. It's just that I think you can go too far with not only critiquing, but particularly with calling to destroy and destroy is a strong word, but essentially critical race theory is Marxist, and it does want to rewrite the foundational principles of American society into something much more left-leaning, much more communistic, and that is provocative. That is provocative. And so much of the accompanying ideologies do seem to have some sort of adverse relationship to the family institution. Maybe I don't believe that, but there is a tension. There is a tension between a lot of the cultural left and the basic family unit. I'm not saying, no, there is. Let me be more strong on that. There is. And I'm not saying, now, I'm not saying these people who are in relationships with three other people and the polygamy and the all of it and the trans, not passing any judgment on any of it. I'm not saying any of them are intending to destroy the family unit. I'm just saying there is a tension. That's my point. And so Trump represents a strong cultural reaction to the bubbling up of this far left ideology that has been circulating in all different types of cultural institutions in America. Culture, culture, culture. And little old me stumbled into a CRT elective in 2021, took another one the following semester, couldn't get enough of it. And speaking of identity, I have formed a bit of an identity around that experience. And I've been shouting from a rooftop for the last 5 years. I voted for Obama twice, Hillary and Joe, but after studying CRT and talking to libertarians and conservatives and liking Vivek and DeSantis and then committing to Kennedy, and then because Kennedy was my way of having my cake and eating it too, and sure he wasn't going to win, but he had my vote, and that made sense for me. And then the endorsement, I go, oh my God, now I'm a Trump guy, and now I'm a proud Trump guy, trying to make sense of it all. Does this all make sense to you? I think it does, but I've built an identity around this search for political identity. And what this lecture has helped me understand is, what has it helped me understand? Let's recap. Yeah. But what it's helped me understand is that you're never going to find it. If you're, in my case, I don't think I'm ever going to find it on the left or the right. Maybe some people are able to just lock in and choose one. But for me, I think I'm always going to be a guy taking a higher view. Not to say that I'm more noble than the next guy. I'm just saying my disposition is kind of that way. I want people to thrive. I'm not particularly dogmatic. I'm open-minded. I want to do the right thing. So, do I not have principles? That's really the question. Everyone talks about principles, the principles of being a libertarian, and the principles of Dave Smith. He's a moron. Some people say, obviously I don't think that, but some people say he's a moron. Some people say he's just a principled libertarian. Yeah, principle. So where the rubber meets the road. You want to be principled, but you also don't live in a world of pure principle. So you got to act and you got to make decisions and live with consequences. And that's what Trump has done. And like I've said a few times today, I'm sure you'll join me in praying for us all. Heavy times, and I am proud and humbled, like I said in the introduction here, to be navigating them with you. Appreciate you following along on my journey, and so where does that leave us? It's very helpful. It's very helpful. If I want to keep podcasting, I'm not calling it quits. I'm going to keep podcasting for now, but I'm just saying, I relabeled, I rebranded, I should say, from searching for political identity to the Brian Escout Show last year. And although I did that, I've still been in my mind thinking this is still a search for political identity. That's how I produce content. I just form it around that. So can I continue to build my identity, my media identity, my podcast identity around this search? I suppose I could. And this just helps me understand. It takes the pressure off. Hey, bro, you don't need to worry about becoming the next Karl Marx or becoming the next, I don't know, pick a libertarian economist, a great one, Milton Friedman. Don't worry about it. But my problem is I'm inspired by great thinkers, right? And great thinkers seem to have strong opinions with conviction, and I do want convictions. I'm a man of conviction, and so you're always going to feel like Is it okay to be operating where it's like, just wind me up and point me and I'll go? Is that who I want to be? Or do I want to be the guy who you go to and say, well, sir, what do you think? It's like, well, what do I think? The free market is the best way. So therefore it must be it's a, the search goes on. Okay. So thank you all very much for being with me. And I look forward to the next episode. Do I have something on the books? Oh, I'm sure I do. I'm sure I do. I have several conversations with people setting up episodes. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, I do. Yeah. I'm going to get into bail reform randomly. Someone reached out to me. They want to talk about, they're passionate activists when it comes, they're conservative, I think. Something about bail reform and why the progressives are wrong. And so I think I'll be sympathetic to his view. His name is Ken Good. Happy to host him. He reached out. It's very nice. So that should be great. And I'll see you next time. Be well. Be safe. God bless.